A vicious attack leaves a Cleveland woman fighting for her life.
She was bleeding heavily from her head, her scalp.
She's trembling in fear and screaming that they're trying to kill her.
But the investigation quickly turns into a case of she said, she said.
They tried every which way to discredit me.
She was yelling that that's her, that's the lady that tried to kill me.
When detectives finally unravel the truth, it turns out to be stranger than anything they could have possibly imagined.
We were dealing with somebody that was just incorrigible.
She faked her way into Yale University.
She gives her story about being abducted.
She snapped when she actually realized she was going to have to face justice.
I've never seen anybody try to fake their own death to avoid going to jail.
This was easily the most diabolical incident I ever had to investigate.
Do you remember what the female looked like?
She's seated right there.
April 21st, 2001. It's a pleasant spring afternoon in East Cleveland, Ohio. But for the workers inside a fast food restaurant, things take a violent turn.
On that particular day, there was a 911 call that came in from the Kentucky Fried Chicken.
What they are witnessing is a woman who bursts into the restaurant, trembling in fear, bloodied about the head, and screaming that they're trying to kill her, not knowing whether this is something that is drug-induced or otherwise. They pick up the phone, call 911.
When first responders arrive, they find the woman, 27-year-old Melissa Latham, in a state of shock.
She had a large laceration or cut on her forehead and was also bleeding heavily from her head, her scalp. She was very coherent at the time, but she was definitely hysterical. Melissa was telling the officers that there was a woman across the street and her male cousin that assaulted her and tried to kill her. She did mention that she was injected with insulin during her assault, but she did not go into why or anything that led up to it. Melissa is very believable, but at the same time, due to the fact we don't know the parties or who's involved, it's a big question mark.
As the first responders are taking in what Melissa is telling them, suddenly on scene appears another woman, well put together, and she has her own story, contradicting what Melissa is relaying to them.
A black female walks in yelling at the victim that she tried to take her money from her, $1,000. Melissa saw her and actually climbed over the counter to get away from her and was yelling that that's her, that's the lady that tried to kill me.
While first responders tend to Melissa inside, police take the new arrival outside.
She was asked her identity, and she identified herself as Tonica Jenkins.
The story that Tonica gives is that Melissa stole money from her and from her cousin, Kyle Martin.
Tonica seemed very believable. She didn't have any marks on her. She seemed very clean-cut and pretty much kept with her story that Melissa took $1,000 from her. She didn't indicate that she was involved in no way, shape, or form with the assault of Melissa. So based on the totality of statements, it was imperative that we find out what was going on.
Melissa Rochelle Latham was born July 14, 1973. She grew up in East Cleveland along with 4 siblings.
My father was a truck driver, and my mother was a nurse, and we lived good. Everything was structured. We had chores. We had Bible studies. We sat down at the table and ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Coming up as kids, my sister Melissa was the one that I could communicate with effectively. We just had that bond. Melissa was bubbly, outgoing, always energetic, always making us laugh.
Despite a happy early childhood, the 90s brought on a difficult era for the Latham family.
When my mom was going through her addiction, that was the time when we were supposed to be being nurtured. And, you know, it was hard. And my father did all he could. I didn't know what was going on. I was a kid. We end up, I remember moving from place to place with my mom's friends. Melissa started acting out from trying to replace what was missing from what we knew to be normal. When she was 13 years old, she got pregnant and had a baby, her first child. She really tried, but she was a baby herself.
A second child followed a few years later, and Melissa, like her mother before her, began using drugs as an escape from reality.
The drug didn't take over her like that. She still was functional. So I really didn't know the difference until it was obvious. She started looking different. She started acting different. She would be out in the streets all night. That's what addiction does.
Melissa eventually had 7 children, and to fund her increasing drug use, she turned to a life of petty crime.
She was a booster, a thief, steal out of stores, clothes, you know, sell them to other people. Often she'd get caught and she would have to go sit down in the county jail for lengths of times until she, you know, go to court and she'd come out. Then she'll go right back to doing what she do and get back in trouble and end back up in jail.
As a result, the state declared Melissa an unfit mother and placed her children in foster care.
When she found out the kids was gone, it crushed her. I think it made her slip deeper into her addiction. Addiction feels like helpless, hopeless, dark. It made her forget about everything that made her her. I can remember her trying to seek help. But everything she did, she always found herself going back to the drug.
As Melissa entered her late 20s, the family moved from East Cleveland to the suburb of Oakwood in the late 90s, hoping to help turn her life around.
When we moved to Oakwood, Melissa started working off and on. She gets a job at McDonald's and things getting a little bit better. It gave her more clarity. It gave her more purpose having a job. But she still would go and do what she wanted to do eventually. She would find a way to get high. And unfortunately, that's what happened that night.
Instead of escaping her addiction, it appears Melissa might have become the victim of a drug deal gone wrong. As officers continue speaking with Tonica, Melissa's condition worsens.
EMTs on scene definitely need to stabilize her. Melissa mentioned she was just injected with amounts of insulin that definitely started to affect her, so they needed to rush her to the hospital. So as Melissa's being wheeled into the ambulance, she points at the residence, letting officers know that is where the assault occurred. That was definitely indicative for us to get over to that house and find out who was there, but also corroborate what happened.
Coming up, one of the women at this bizarre scene is lying to officers. The question is, who?
Melissa tells the police that the attack happened across the street. Tonica says no, it didn't.
And investigators hear the details of a diabolical scheme.
She wanted to know if he knew any females that wanted to make some money.
When the car pulled up on me, she say, what you doing tonight?
While Melissa Latham is rushed to the hospital, police continue questioning her alleged attacker, Tonica Jenkins. According to her, Melissa has the story all wrong.
Tonica gave the impression that for that day or previous days, Melissa was doing drugs with her cousin Kyle Martin.
Melissa tells the police that the attack happened at the family home across the street from the fast food restaurant. Tonica says no, it didn't happen at the house, it happened at an abandoned building next door.
Tonica indicated whatever occurred that happened between Kyle and Melissa Latham. She had no involvement.
Although Tonica seems to be the more believable of the two, officers decide to check for themselves.
They've been directed to the family home by Melissa, and Tonica agrees to let them into the home, but then there's delay.
Tonica indicated it was hard to get in. She had to ring the doorbell because her parents were inside and they were in fact elderly. But after a few minutes, officers were able to make entry with Tonica into the residence. But officers did notice that she was being evasive.
Since Melissa claimed she was attacked in the basement, that's the first place the officers look.
The basement was not finished and pretty much appeared to be used for storage. There were bikes, boxes, a refrigerator. The first thing they noticed was a strong odor of bleach, and they noted that Tonica's mother was cleaning.
They ask her what she's doing, and she says that she's cleaning after the dogs because her grandbabies play down there.
Officers notice the coincidence and quickly spot something that doesn't add up.
Officers noted blood splatter on the stairs and a couple other locations in the basement. It was indicative to officers that something definitely happened and further investigation was needed to follow up on what physical evidence might still remain at the house.
Based on their findings, police put Tonica in police custody, while other officers focus on tracking down her cousin, Kyle.
As officers are in the basement with Tonica and her mother, another set of officers happened to be checking next door to both residences, and that's where they happened upon Kyle Martin.
Kyle Martin is sweaty, he's scratched up.
They handcuffed him and led him outside. We encountered Tonica, who's also handcuffed. At that point, Kyle noted she was handcuffed and said, "Hey, you can uncuff her and let her go." This was all me.
Kyle Martin tells the police he is the one that attacked and assaulted Melissa. So with that admission, police then do release Tonica Jenkins at that point to further their investigation by taking Kyle in for further questioning.
Checking into Kyle, he had a long, extensive criminal history. Receiving stolen property, carrying concealed weapons, selling of substitute illicit drugs, and also grand theft.
While waiting on a warrant to inspect the scene, investigators employ a little trickery to get Kyle to talk.
We indicated that Melissa had passed away. There is no clean-cut rule that you have to tell the entire truth or be transparent during an investigation.
The tactic works, and with the added pressure from detectives, Kyle breaks.
Once he was advised that Melissa Latham passed away, he was very cooperative at that point and wanted to give his side of the story. What we learned, I think this was easily the most diabolical and thought out incident I ever had to investigate.
April 24th, 2001. Police have Kyle Martin in custody for the attack on Melissa Latham, and he has agreed to reveal what really happened. Kyle starts by explaining how he and his cousin first encountered Melissa Latham.
He mentioned that Tonica wanted to know if he knew any females that wanted to make some money. It was through an insurance fraud where they could find females who would get examined, whether it was dental visits, pap smears, breast examinations, and they would make money from doing this.
Kyle says he didn't know the details on how the scam would work, but Tonica offered him compensation for his help, so he agreed without question. 4 days ago, on April 20th, he and Tonica went cruising for volunteers.
They drive around East Cleveland and happen upon Melissa Latham. She's walking westbound late at night on Euclid Avenue by United Furniture in East Cleveland. They approach her in a red, small, mid-sized vehicle with Pennsylvania plates. Kyle is seated in the back of the vehicle, and Tonica is driving. They ask her, would she be interested in making some money, just doing some insurance fraud? And she agrees to do so.
Kyle says Melissa was under the impression that she was doing this insurance scam for medical payout.
According to Kyle, they stopped to buy drugs and returned to the house on Delmont. The next day, they took Melissa to the dentist for x-rays.
They went to Strongsville, Ohio to the dental appointment, and he remained in the car while Tonica and Melissa went in for the appointment. About an hour later, they come back to the car, and from there they go to retrieve more drugs. And then after that, they went back where they smoked the drugs.
Their scheme had been a success, but Kyle says the following morning, things took a turn for the worse.
Kyle Martin wakes up and he's paranoid from using drugs the night before. Latham is still there, which kind of upset him. He didn't feel comfortable with her being there. While she's in the bathroom, Kyle notes that $800 and some crack is missing. When Melissa comes out of the bathroom, Kyle's agitated and strikes her in the forehead and also in the back of the head. Tonica, hearing a commotion, comes downstairs and asks what's going on, what's the problem. At this point, Kyle says, geez, your problem. Kyle then mentions that Tonica assaults Melissa with a brick. She was laying in a pool of blood, and Kyle is watching Tonica inject her at least 4 times in the left arm with insulin. At this time, Kyle's like, wow, Dr. Kevorkian, what are you doing?
Kyle claims he left the basement at that point to get some air, but Tonica joined him a few moments later.
Tonica mentions that Melissa has gotten away. At this point, Tonica takes the brick and also the syringe that was used in the assault, wraps it in a gray plastic bag, and takes it next door to the abandoned area between the house and throws it over the fence.
They have Kyle Martin in custody. He's detained upon the basis of his admission that he's the one that assaulted Melissa.
It was imperative to not only corroborate his interview with Melissa, but also check on Melissa's condition. Upon arriving to the hospital, we were unable to interview her because she was still out of it. She had 6 stitches to the front of her forehead, and she had 25 to 30 staples to the back of her head from the attack with the brick. Due to the insulin that was injected with her, her blood sugar was dangerously low.
When investigators talked to Melissa's doctors, her injuries seemed to match the story Kyle told them.
It was corroborated that a heavy blunt object caused a lot of the bruises and contusions and lacerations to Melissa Latham, which is consistent with the brick that was mentioned by Kyle Martin.
Her insulin levels are off the charts. That corroborates what Kyle is telling the police.
Melissa was in a very critical state. We were very worried that she wasn't going to pull through with this.
Melissa Latham, Latham. I just remember them saying I was lucky. A miracle of God, most definitely. I remember waking up looking, I had like scabs all across my face, a lot of staples in my head, and I had stitches in my forehead. I couldn't believe I was in that situation.
The day after Kyle Martin's confession, investigators get good news. Melissa Latham has regained consciousness and is finally able to talk to them.
We definitely wanted to be sensitive to her and her condition. First, we wanted her to be able to identify the possible suspects. So she was shown one photo array where she positively identified Kyle Martin, and she was shown another photo array where she was able to identify Tonica Jenkins. So that helped us immensely, and she established that those were the two individuals that attacked her.
After identifying Kyle and Tonica, Melissa tells police everything she can remember about what happened.
It was pretty much identical to Kyle's, from starting with her walking westbound down Euclid, that they offered her some money so she could do this insurance fraud.
When the car pulled up on me, she say, what you doing tonight? I'm like, I'm trying to make some money. She say, well, we can have you make money. All you got to do is, go to the dentist. I'm like, well, ain't no dentist office open at 2 o'clock in the morning. She like, no, we're going to take you in the morning. She gave me a shirt, a sweatshirt, which was a Yale shirt. Then she say, okay, when we go, we're going to make up a name to put on the paperwork. And she was acting like she was making up a name, right, for this insurance scam. At the time, I didn't know it, but she was putting her name under my dental work.
The reason wouldn't become clear until they got back from the appointment.
She takes us back to the house on Delmont. Go back to where we was at in the basement doing the same thing, which was smoking drugs. I had went to the bathroom to brush my teeth and stuff. The light was on the bathroom, so when I came out, wasn't no lights on. I'm like, could y'all turn the lights on? I can't see. And that's when I felt Kyle swing at me. I'm asking, why y'all doing this to me? What did I do? I know I didn't steal nothing. I'm asking them, what did I do? They was hitting me and punched me. And then she picked up a sledgehammer. And she was like, no, don't use that, just use the bricks. So he hit me in the head with the brick about 3 times. He was like, she ain't passed out yet. And that's when she grabbed the brick and hit me 2 more times. And I started putting up a fight and was fighting for my life, fighting, but I had ran out of energy. All of a sudden, I feel needles going into my body. Kyle was like, what is you doing? What is you sticking her with? She was like, oh, this mama's insulin. I just want her to pass out. I'm like, Lord, I got to play dead, because if I don't play dead, I'm gonna be dead. They was talking while they thought I was unconscious. She was telling Kyle, this is your cousin right here. We're gonna get this ankle bracelet off me, put it on her, because she's gonna be me, and I'm gonna be dead. She was like, we're gonna take her to this abandoned apartment next door and burn her up. All they gonna have to identify her is by her dental records. I was scared to death. I just knew I was about to die.
At that point, Tonica has Kyle go upstairs with her to find something to wrap up Melissa's body so they can burn her in the garage, outside.
Soon as I hear the doors close and I heard them upstairs, I got up. I was a little dizzy from the incident. And the spoon that me and Kyle was cooking drugs up on, I used the end of that spoon to unlock the door. And I got out the door. On the outside of the door was a pit bull. I'm scared as hell of pit bulls, but I wasn't scared this day. I got that door open, run across the street, went into KFC, and I say, they tried to kill me, could y'all please call 911?
For investigators, Melissa's story changes everything.
So at this point, the whole plot became very nefarious to us. It went from a robbery over drugs and money to basically an attempted murder case. Why was it important for Tonica to kill Melissa Latham to make her appear to be her?
Next, homicide detectives look into Tonica Jenkins' background.
Tonica grew up in East Cleveland. She grew up with two brothers.
She was living in the greater Cleveland area with her mother and father. Her father was a retired police officer.
The relationship between mother and daughter seemed to be, as one would expect, they seemed to be very tight, very close, traveled together, and I'm sure leaned on one another for support. Tonica was always the person that was labeled as a smart one of the family and attended Cuyahoga County Community College for a number of years back in the early 1990s. She then applies for a graduate program at the Yale University in their neuroscience department.
She was able to get a full ride as well as $16,000 additionally with the grant.
It's during her classwork that the professor is perplexed because she's not at the level where she should be based on her transcripts, based on the letters of recommendation. So he picks up the phone and calls one of the professors from her community college and wants some insight as to how can I help Tonica succeed here, and that's when it starts to unravel. They have no record of her.
What she'd done was apparently created a paper trail that represented her to be a gifted young neuroscientist, when in fact she was not.
When they pull up her criminal history, detectives discover the ankle bracelet Melissa Latham described is actually an ankle monitor Tonica is required to wear from a previous conviction.
We were able to see that in 1998, she was charged with fraud.
Once her deception was uncovered, Tonica was charged with counts of forgery and larceny. But on the morning of her court date, she failed to show up.
I'm like, well, this is not good. The judge is going to come out in a few minutes, and he's spitting nails today. Where is she? They made efforts to call her, but we were unable to find her.
Eventually, Tonica returned to her home in East Cleveland with a dramatic explanation.
She said the reason she didn't make it to court was because she had been kidnapped, raped, thrown in the back of a trunk, and driven to Philadelphia, where they dumped the car. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that shows up in fiction, in novels, you know.
Coming up, Tonica Jenkins' motive is revealed.
She lied to get into Yale. She lied about what happened to Melissa. She's a liar.
She'd already been convicted of fraud. She just was stepping up her game.
Detectives look into Tonica Jenkins' history and discover a stunning pattern of lies and deceit. a charge from 1997 for forgery and larceny after being admitted to Yale under false documentation. Tonica failed to show up for sentencing, claiming she was kidnapped.
Tonica gives her story about being abducted and raped. Then I hear stuffed in the trunk of her car, and somehow she managed to get out and drive home. That's stretched credulity. I'm willing to go a long way toward believing the narratives my client tells me, but this was difficult.
Her attorney even receives an anonymous delivery.
I was shown photographs of her purportedly in the trunk. Who took the photographs, how she got them, they raised some pretty significant credibility questions.
Despite the outlandish excuses, Tonica's attorney was able to negotiate a plea deal for her to repay the money she took from Yale and serve 3 years of probation.
I was prepared to try the case rather than agree to a plea bargain that involved prison time. Then the state insisted that she get a felony. But after several court appearances, the state agreed to submit her to what's called accelerated rehabilitation, which is a program that says if you'll complete a brief period of probation, the charge will be dismissed.
Tonica's police record shows that months after starting her probation, she was arrested again, this time in Florida.
We learned that Tonica and her mother, Tonica, were up for a trial for trafficking drugs. We spoke with the head agent.
At that particular time, I was in a narcotics group. We had undercover agents contacted by 2 ladies from Cleveland about coming down here and negotiating a drug deal. So we set up a time, and they met at a restaurant here in Tampa.
Tonica said that she had people that she could sell this cocaine to, and ultimately what she wanted was she wanted to take 10 kilos.
We made an arrangement for them to show up to a location here in Tampa, a warehouse that we controlled, and they were to bring $100,000. When they came in the warehouse, the undercover was letting them know that he needed to see the money. The 2 ladies pulled the money out of vacuum seal bags. Once he saw the money, he made a phone call where the second undercover showed up with a flash amount of cocaine. The mother actually cut it and taste tested it, which no professional drug dealer does that. Nobody with any sense puts their finger in anything and puts it in their mouth if they don't know what it is. So we thought they'd definitely been watching too much television.
Once Tonica and her mother committed to the exchange, the rest of the undercover team swept in and made the arrests.
They were charged with conspiracy to possess with intent to distribute 5 kilograms or more of cocaine. With those charges, they were facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years, up to life imprisonment.
They had their initial appearance in federal court here in Tampa, and the judge granted them a bond so they could go home to Cleveland prior to trial. As a condition of her bond, Tonica Jenkins was going to be required to wear an ankle monitor.
To detectives in East Cleveland, Tonica's motive for using Melissa to fake her own death is now clear.
Just as Tonica faked her way into a rape and kidnapping, she was trying to make this into an ag murder where she can avoid her charges in Tampa, Florida.
She lied to get into Yale. She lied about where she was when she was supposed to show up for court. She lied about what happened after Melissa was attacked and escaped. She's a liar.
She'd already been convicted of fraud. She just was stepping up her game. It's troublesome to think that Jenkins thought Melissa was so worthless and that her life meant nothing, that she was going to kill her to avoid going to prison for something that she did. I believe Tonica Jenkins snapped when she actually realized she was going to have to face justice.
So after speaking with the U.S. attorney and also with the head agent for her case, we were able to get 2 warrants, one for Tonica for attempted murder and for her mother for tampering with evidence, complicity, and obstruction.
Investigators return to the Delmont address and discover both women are gone.
So the only person detained is Kyle Martin at this point. Police go to look for Tonica and her mother and find that they have already left the state on their way down to Florida to stand trial for the drug case that they're trying to avoid.
Kyle Martin, Tonica Jenkins, and her mother, Tonica Clement, have been charged in connection to the attempted murder of Melissa Latham. But prosecutors in Cleveland will have to wait their turn to try them.
April 2001, they returned here to Tampa for trial. Once I found out about the attempted murder of Melissa Latham, I figured we were dealing with somebody that was just incorrigible. To go from committing fraud to dealing cocaine is one thing, but taking her house arrest bracelet off and putting it on a dead body so you could fake your own death, there's really no explanation for that.
Tonica and Tonica were both found guilty on each of the 2 counts. Conspiracy to possess with intent to distribute 5 kilograms or more of cocaine, and possession with intent to distribute 5 kilograms or more of cocaine. The judge ended up sentencing Tonica to 24 years and 7 months. And Tonica was sentenced to 15 years and 7 months.
We had to wait a couple of years before we were able to extradite them back from Florida.
In February 2003, mother and daughter returned to Ohio to face the attempted murder charges.
We presented 16 witnesses that testified. The picture that was painted was one that Tonica Jenkins, the daughter, was the mastermind behind what happened to Melissa. Melissa had to relive that night when she saw her life almost snuffed out. Telling the story in the factual sense was easy, but in an emotional sense, I'm sure it took a toll on her. Do you remember what the female looked like?
Yes.
Could you point out, for the record, where she is seated and an article of clothing that she is wearing?
She's seated right there with the maroon sweater on.
Your Honor, if the record would reflect that Ms. Latham has identified Tonica Jenkins.
The defense has no witnesses to call, but they insist Melissa's testimony can't be trusted.
Kyle will not testify, and one of the challenges was our witnesses, for the most part, were all either recovering drug addicts or still under the influence, still in the grips of addiction, starting with Melissa herself.
They tried every which way to discredit me.
You were convicted of a theft offense in Maple Heights, were you not?
Yes.
When did you begin using crack cocaine?
About 4 years ago. The evidence spoke for itself. They had the dentist, they had the clothes, the brick, the staples in my head. I ain't hit myself. And they found traces of my blood in the basement. The mama was trying to clean it up. And I think that they believed me because Kyle confessed.
In her corner was the truth. And I think it really struck a chord with the jury.
In just one day, they returned their verdict.
Tonica Jenkins was found guilty of 2 counts of tampering with evidence, attempted aggravated murder, complicity to commit murder, kidnapping, and felonious assault. She was sentenced to 20 years in Ohio Penitentiary. The mother, Tonica Clement, was found guilty of obstructing justice and was then sentenced to 1 year.
In a separate trial, Kyle Martin is found guilty of kidnapping and sentenced to 10 years.
Kyle said that he was scared of Tonica because she would have had him killed too. He was just trying to make it seem like he didn't have nothing to do with it.
I felt Tonica definitely received the appropriate time meted to her for her actions. I felt Kyle should have received a lot more. He had a lot more involvement than I think he alluded to or admitted to, as well as the mother.
This case is different on several different levels. Her prior criminal history, for example, is something that one would never hear of. That literally is a made-for-TV movie.
In 30 years as a federal prosecutor, I mean, I've seen people who have been killed, mostly witnesses, so that they wouldn't testify, but I've never seen anybody try to fake their own death to avoid going to jail.
Tonica Jenkins is the kind of person that would befriend somebody and smile in their face and laugh and tell jokes with promises and just for the control to complete whatever objective she got planned. That take an emptiness.
She cold. She ain't cold enough, though. I got scars, but I'm still me. I'm still Melissa Rochelle Latham at the end of the day. I know addiction is a beast. I'm just saying, be careful and be aware of your surroundings and try to get help, because there is help out here, y'all. It's help, you know, and forgive yourself.
The human mind possesses an extraordinary capacity for creative thought. Yet, when that creativity is untethered from moral boundaries and directed toward the evasion of justice, it can produce schemes that are as baffling as they are tragic. In the quiet afternoon of April 21, 2001, in the city of East Cleveland, Ohio, the peaceful routine of a local fast food restaurant, specifically a Kentucky Fried Chicken establishment, was shattered by an event that seemed to belong more to the realm of fiction than reality. A young woman named Melissa Latham, then 27 years old, burst through the doors of the restaurant in a state of extreme distress, exhibiting signs of severe physical trauma, with visible injuries to her head and forehead, crying out desperately that individuals were actively attempting to take her life. The employees, faced with a highly chaotic and alarming situation, immediately placed a call to the emergency services, summoning first responders and police officers to the scene. The responding officers arrived to find Melissa in a state of profound shock, trembling with fear, but remaining remarkably coherent as she described a terrifying ordeal. She explained that she had been lured to a nearby residence, subjected to a physical assault involving heavy objects, and injected with metabolic regulating substances, specifically insulin, in a deliberate attempt to render her unresponsive. As the emergency medical technicians began their efforts to stabilize Melissa and prepare her for transport to a medical facility, the situation took an even more unexpected turn. Another woman, who appeared exceptionally poised, well-dressed, and completely calm, walked into the establishment and presented a completely contradictory account of the afternoon events. This woman identified herself as Tonica Jenkins, and she asserted with great confidence that Melissa was actually a dishonest individual who had stolen a sum of $1,000 from her and her cousin, Kyle Martin. When Melissa caught sight of Tonica, her terror escalated dramatically, and she attempted to climb over the service counter to escape, screaming that Tonica was the very person who had tried to end her life. The responding officers were presented with a classic case of conflicting testimonies, where two individuals offered completely opposite narratives, forcing the investigators to rely on physical evidence, psychological evaluation, and meticulous background checks to uncover the truth. To understand how these individuals arrived at this dramatic intersection on a spring afternoon, it is essential to examine the personal history of Melissa Latham, who was born on July 14, 1973. Raised in a highly structured household in East Cleveland alongside four siblings, Melissa enjoyed a childhood defined by clear routines, chores, and family meals. However, the decade of the 90s brought significant challenges to her family, as her mother struggled with substance abuse, causing instability that deeply affected the young children. Melissa began to seek escapes from the difficulties of her environment, leading to early motherhood at the age of 13, and a subsequent descent into personal struggles and minor legal infractions. To support her lifestyle, she engaged in petty theft, which frequently resulted in brief periods of incarceration, and eventually, her children were placed into the care of the state. Despite these profound difficulties, Melissa continued to seek paths toward stability, relocating to the suburb of Oakwood in the late 90s and finding employment at a local fast food establishment, showing a resilient desire to rebuild her life. Yet, her vulnerability made her an easy target for individuals seeking to exploit someone they perceived as lacking social support and legal standing. In sharp contrast to Melissa, Tonica Jenkins was raised in a comfortable home in East Cleveland ve Kep e Tat, a supportive family, which included a father who was a retired law enforcement officer. Tonica was widely regarded as an exceptionally bright and promising young woman, having attended a local community college in Ohio for several years during the early 90s. Her ambition and capacity for manipulation became fully evident when she applied to a highly prestigious graduate program in the neuroscience department at Yale University. By fabricating academic transcripts, falsifying letters of recommendation, and creating an entirely fictitious academic history, Tonica secured admission to the Ivy League institution, along with a full scholarship and a stipend of $16,000. Her academic deception, however, was short-lived. During her coursework, her professors quickly realized that her scientific knowledge did not align with her stellar academic credentials. A simple phone call to her previous community college revealed that they had no record of her outstanding achievements, and her elaborate academic facade completely collapsed, charged with forgery and larceny. In the year 1997, Tonica failed to appear for her sentencing hearing, later presenting a highly dramatic and implausible story of having been abducted, forced into the trunk of a vehicle, and driven to another state. Despite the extreme nature of her claims, which stretched the boundaries of credibility, her legal representative managed to negotiate a highly favorable agreement that allowed her to avoid incarceration in exchange for probation and financial restitution. The pattern of desperate evasion and escalating criminality continued when Tonica and her mother, Tonica Clement, traveled to Tampa, Florida, where they attempted to negotiate a large-scale transaction involving 10 kilograms of illegal substances with undercover federal agents for a sum of $100,000. Following their arrest by federal authorities, both women faced the prospect of a mandatory minimum prison sentence of 10 years to life. After securing release on bond, under the strict condition of electronic house arrest, requiring Tonica to wear an electronic monitoring device on her ankle, she returned to Ohio, realizing that the evidence against her in the federal drug case was overwhelming and that a long period of incarceration was inevitable. Tonica decided to employ her manipulative talents to devise a scheme to fake her own death and permanently escape the reach of the law. The plan was as calculated as it was heartless. Tonica decided that the key to convincing authorities of her death lay in creating a perfect paper trail of physical and medical evidence. She enlisted the assistance of her cousin, Kyle Martin, to locate a young woman of similar age, build, and appearance who could serve as a decoy. On the evening of April 20th, 2001, while driving a vehicle with out-of-state plates, Tonica and Kyle encountered Melissa Latham walking along Euclid Avenue. Presenting themselves under false names, they offered Melissa an opportunity to participate in what they described as a simple financial arrangement involving medical and dental insurance documentation. Melissa, eager for an opportunity to earn money to improve her circumstances, agreed to accompany them. The next morning, Tonica took Melissa to a professional dental office in Strongsville, Ohio, under the name of Tonica Jenkins, to obtain dental examinations and X-rays. S. behavior during this visit was highly unusual, as she insisted on completing all the paperwork herself and instructed Melissa to wear thick winter gloves on a warm spring day to prevent anyone from observing her hands or handwriting. The ultimate goal of this bizarre errand was to establish a set of official dental records associated with the name of Tonica Jenkins, which would later be used by forensic examiners to identify a deceased individual. Following the dental appointment, the group returned to the basement of the residence on Delmont Avenue. There, the situation turned violent as Kyle Martin and Tonica Jenkins launched a sudden and unprovoked physical assault on Melissa, using heavy household objects to inflict serious injuries. To ensure that Melissa would not survive, Tonica administered multiple injections of metabolic regulating medicine, specifically insulin, which she had obtained from her mother's medical supplies. Believing that Melissa had lost consciousness and was near death, Tonica and Kyle began discussing the final phases of their plan, which involved removing Tonica's electronic monitoring ankle bracelet, attaching it to Melissa, transporting her to a nearby abandoned building, and using heat to destroy the remains. They fully anticipated that when investigators discovered the scene, they would rely on the newly created dental records to identify the remains as those of Tonica Jenkins, allowing the actual Tonica to assume a new identity and live free from federal prosecution. However, the perpetrators severely underestimated the resilience and willpower of Melissa Latham. Feigning unconsciousness to protect herself from further harm, Melissa waited until her attackers went upstairs to retrieve materials to transport her. Summoning every ounce of her remaining physical strength, she used a small household utensil left in the basement to unlock the exit door. She successfully bypassed a large guard dog in the yard, ran across the street, and sought safety in the fast food restaurant, setting the investigation in motion. When the police began their work, they were immediately faced with the challenge of determining which of the two women was telling the truth. The key to resolving this dispute lay in the physical evidence and the subtle clues that the perpetrators left behind due to their own haste and arrogance. Upon entering the Delmont Avenue residence, officers noticed a powerful odor of chemical cleaning agents, specifically bleach, and observed Tonica's mother, actively cleaning the basement stairs. Despite her claims that she was merely cleaning after domestic pets, officers quickly spotted significant blood spatter on the staircase and walls, indicating that a violent struggle had indeed occurred in that very space. Furthermore, a search of the adjacent vacant property revealed a plastic bag containing a heavy household brick and a syringe, perfectly corroborating the details of the physical assault described by Melissa. The investigation gained significant momentum when officers located Kyle Martin nearby, looking disheveled and highly anxious. Recognizing the opportunity to apply psychological pressure, detectives utilized a clever investigative technique by informing Kyle that Melissa had not survived her injuries. Believing that he was now facing a capital offense, Kyle's composure collapsed, and he provided a comprehensive, highly detailed confession that exposed the entire plot, confirming that Tonica Jenkins was the mastermind who had organized every element of the scheme to avoid her upcoming federal drug trial in Florida. This remarkable case offers a profound study in the contrast between perceived intelligence and practical foolishness. Tonica Jenkins possessed an intellectual capability that allowed her to successfully deceive admissions officers at one of the world's most selective academic institutions. Yet her criminal schemes were characterized by an astonishing lack of foresight and attention to detail. Her belief that she could seamlessly execute a highly complex, violent crime while under active federal electronic monitoring in a house shared vacep tehat, her elderly parents, using a victim who lived in the same community, reveals a deep pathological narcissism. She operated under the arrogant assumption that she was far superior to everyone around her, including her victim and the law enforcement officers, which ultimately led to her complete undoing. For the community, this case serves as a solemn warning and an educational lesson about the dangers of manipulation and the importance of personal safety. It highlights the necessity of remaining vigilant when presented with unusual financial opportunities that seem too good to be true, and the importance of recognizing the red flags of deceptive behavior, such as requests to use false identification or to hide one's handwriting and identity. It also reminds us of the profound value of human life and the resilience of the human spirit, as demonstrated by Melissa Latham, who refused to succumb to despair and fought courageously for her survival. From an investigative perspective, the rapid resolution of this case underscores the importance of physical evidence, swift forensic analysis, and the strategic use of psychological interview techniques by law enforcement. By prioritizing the preservation of the crime scene, recognizing the inconsistency of the cleaning efforts, and coordinating effectively across state and federal jurisdictions, the police were able to dismantle a highly sophisticated yet poorly executed criminal conspiracy. Ultimately, justice prevailed as Tonica Jenkins was sentenced to a lengthy term of 20 years in an Ohio state penitentiary, to be served consecutively with her federal drug sentence of over 24 years, while her mother and cousin also received significant prison sentences for their roles in this extraordinary and tragic plot. The victory of good over evil in this case stands as a testament to the dedication of the investigating forces and the enduring power of truth. The human capacity for deception is as vast as it is troubling, often revealing a profound disconnect between intellectual capability and moral responsibility. In the annals of criminal history, there are cases that challenge our fundamental understanding of human behavior, showcasing a level of manipulation so intricate that it blurs the line between reality and absurd fiction. One such case unfolded in the spring of 2001 in East Cleveland, Ohio, exposing a plot so devious that it left even seasoned investigators struggling to comprehend the depth of the perpetrator's malice. At the heart of this narrative is a clash between two starkly different realities: that of a highly educated, sophisticated fraudster who believed she could manipulate the legal and academic systems at will, and that of a vulnerable young woman fighting to survive both her personal struggles and a calculated attempt on her life. The resolution of this case not only highlights the exceptional dedication of law enforcement, but also serves as a profound testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the inevitable triumph of truth over even the most meticulously constructed lies. To understand how such an extraordinary crime could occur, one must first examine the psychological and social dynamics that drive individuals to commit acts of extreme manipulation. The primary perpetrator, in this case Tonica Jenkins, exhibited a pattern of behavior consistent with a pathological need for control, status, and evasion of accountability. Individuals who engage in high-level fraud often possess an inflated sense of self-importance, coupled with a complete lack of empathy for others. For Tonica, deception was not merely a tool used to achieve a specific end, but rather a fundamental way of interacting with the world. From faking her way into prestigious academic institutions to orchestrating complex financial and legal scams, her life was a series of elaborate fabrications designed to maintain an illusion of intellectual and social superiority. When faced with the ultimate consequence of her actions, a lengthy federal prison sentence, her psychological defense mechanisms did not lead to reflection or remorse, but rather to an escalation of her criminal behavior. The decision to fake her own death by taking the life of another human being represents the ultimate extension of this pathological mindset, where other people are viewed not as individuals vacant, inherent value, but as mere instruments to be used and discarded in the service of her own survival. Conversely, the victim, Melissa Rochelle Latham, represented a segment of society that is all too often targeted by predators due to their vulnerability. Born in the summer of 1973, Melissa grew up in a structured and supportive household in East Cleveland. However, the subsequent decades brought significant hardships to her family, and like many individuals facing systemic and personal challenges, she struggled with substance dependency. This vulnerability led her into a cycle of minor offenses, legal difficulties, and personal loss, including the temporary separation from her children. Yet, despite her struggles, those who knew Melissa described her as a warm, energetic, and resilient individual. It was precisely her vulnerability, however, that made her an attractive target for Tonica Jenkins. Criminals of Tonica's caliber are highly adept at identifying individuals whose disappearance or distress might be overlooked by society or dismissed by authorities as the unfortunate consequence of a high-risk lifestyle. This systemic vulnerability is a critical factor in why such cases occur. Predators count on the indifference of the system to cover their tracks, assuming that the voices of the marginalized will not be heard or believed. The dramatic unraveling of this conspiracy began on the afternoon of April 21, 2001, a day that started as a pleasant spring afternoon, but quickly turned into a scene of chaotic terror. Inside a Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant in East Cleveland, employees and patrons were suddenly startled by the desperate intrusion of a young woman. She was trembling with fear, bleeding heavily from severe injuries to her head and scalp, and screaming hysterically that people were actively trying to kill her. The staff, unsure of the circumstances, but recognizing the immediate danger and distress of the woman, immediately dialed 911. When the first responders and police officers arrived on the scene, they found Melissa Latham in a state of profound shock. Despite her physical trauma, which included a deep cut on her forehead and significant bleeding, she remained remarkably coherent. She urgently informed the responding officers that she had been assaulted across the street at a nearby residence by a woman and her male cousin, and most shockingly, that she had been repeatedly injected with insulin against her will. As the officers began to process this highly unusual and alarming statement, the situation took an even more bizarre turn. A second woman, impeccably dressed and appearing completely composed, walked into the restaurant. This individual, who was later identified as Tonica Jenkins, immediately began shouting at the injured victim, accusing Melissa of having stolen $1,000 from her and her cousin, Kyle Martin. To the responding officers, who had no prior knowledge of the parties involved, the situation presented a baffling contradiction. On one hand, they had a severely injured, hysterical woman claiming she had been subjected to a coordinated, life-threatening assault. On the other hand, they had a clean-cut, well-presented citizen who claimed to be the actual victim of a theft, showing no signs of physical distress or involvement in violence. Melissa's reaction to Tonica's arrival, however, was telling. She climbed over the service counter in a desperate bid to find safety, pointing at Tonica and screaming to the officers that this was indeed the woman who had just tried to end her life. Faced with these conflicting accounts, the police acted with commendable professionalism and caution. While emergency medical services attended to Melissa and prepared to transport her to the hospital, officers escorted Tonica outside to separate the individuals and conduct further inquiries. Tonica maintained her narrative with supreme confidence, asserting that Melissa had spent the previous days with her cousin, Kyle Martin, and had stolen money from them. She completely disassociated herself from any physical altercation, suggesting that whatever injuries Melissa had sustained must have occurred during a dispute with Kyle, or perhaps in an abandoned building next door to the family home. In an effort to demonstrate her cooperation and establish her innocence, Tonica agreed to allow the officers to inspect her family's residence across the street on Delmont Avenue, where Melissa claimed the attack had occurred. This consent, however, proved to be a calculated move that quickly began to fall apart. Upon arriving at the residence, Tonica became noticeably evasive, creating artificial delays by claiming she needed to ring the doorbell because her elderly parents were inside and might be startled. When the officers were finally granted entry, they immediately went down to the basement, the location Melissa had specified as the scene of her ordeal. The basement was unfinished, filled with household storage items, but what immediately struck the officers was the overwhelming, pungent odor of bleach. They observed Tonica's mother, Tonica Clement, actively cleaning the floor and stairs. When questioned about her activities at such an unusual time, the mother claimed she was simply cleaning up after the family dogs, because her grandchildren frequently played in the area. This explanation, however, failed to satisfy the investigators, who quickly spotted what the cleaning efforts had failed to fully obscure: unmistakable blood spatter on the basement stairs and other locations. Recognizing that a serious crime had indeed occurred, the officers placed Tonica Jenkins into custody. Meanwhile, other responding officers searching the immediate exterior of the property made a critical discovery. In an abandoned structure adjacent to the residence, they located Kyle Martin. He was visibly disheveled, sweaty, and covered in scratches, presenting a physical appearance that strongly suggested recent involvement in a violent struggle. Upon seeing his cousin Tonica in handcuffs, Kyle made a spontaneous and highly significant statement, telling the officers that they could release her because the entire incident was his responsibility alone. Based on this self-incriminating admission, the police chose to release Tonica temporarily to focus their immediate resources on interrogating Kyle and securing the crime scene. The interrogation of Kyle Martin would prove to be a masterclass in investigative strategy. The detectives, aware that they were dealing with individuals who possessed a history of criminal sophistication, decided to employ a tactical deception. They informed Kyle that the victim, Melissa Latham, had succumbed to her injuries at the hospital. This pressure tactic had an immediate and dramatic psychological impact on Kyle. Confronted with the prospect of a murder charge, his cooperative instincts kicked in, and he agreed to provide a detailed account of the events leading up to the confrontation. His confession revealed a plot so cold-blooded and calculated that it elevated the case from a simple assault to a deeply unsettling conspiracy of attempted murder and identity theft. According to Kyle's detailed statement, the entire enterprise had been conceived and directed by his cousin, Tonica Jenkins. A few days prior to the incident, Tonica had approached him, asking if he knew of any women who would be interested in making some quick money through what she described as an insurance fraud scheme. The plan, as she explained it, involved finding a female volunteer who would agree to undergo various medical and dental examinations using Tonica's personal identification, allowing them to collect fraudulent payouts. Attracted by the promise of financial compensation, Kyle agreed to assist. On the night of April 19, 2001, while driving around East Cleveland in a vehicle with out-of-state license plates, they encountered Melissa Latham on Euclid Avenue. They offered her a financial reward to participate in their purported insurance scam, and Melissa, facing financial difficulties, accepted the offer. The conspiracy proceeded exactly as Tonica had planned. The following morning, they drove Melissa to a dental clinic in Strongsville, Ohio. Tonica accompanied Melissa inside the clinic, ensuring that Melissa registered and received dental examinations and X-rays under Tonica's actual name, thereby establishing a formal medical record. Afterward, they returned to the Delmont Avenue residence. However, according to Kyle, the situation deteriorated the next day due to paranoia and disputes over missing money and personal property. Kyle claimed he became highly agitated and assaulted Melissa in the basement. When Tonica heard the commotion, she descended into the basement, and instead of intervening to stop the violence, she took active control of the situation. Kyle stated that Tonica assaulted Melissa with a brick, and then, shockingly, produced several syringes filled with insulin, which belonged to her diabetic mother, and administered multiple injections into Melissa's arm. Kyle, claiming to be horrified by these actions, left the basement, and shortly thereafter, Tonica informed him that Melissa had somehow managed to escape. Tonica then attempted to dispose of the physical evidence, including the brick and the syringes, by wrapping them in plastic and throwing them over a fence into an adjacent property. With Kyle's confession in hand, investigators rushed to the hospital to verify the details and assess Melissa's condition. Medical professionals confirmed that Melissa had sustained severe life-threatening injuries, including deep lacerations to her forehead, requiring stitches and extensive trauma to the back of her head that required 25 to 30 staples. Most critically, her blood insulin levels were extraordinarily high, causing her blood sugar to drop to dangerously low levels that could easily have resulted in a fatal coma or brain damage had she not received immediate medical intervention. The medical evidence perfectly corroborated Kyle S.'s account of the assault and the chemical injection. The following day, Melissa Latham regained consciousness and was able to speak with the detectives. Her account of the ordeal not only confirmed Kyle S.'s statements, but added chilling details that exposed the true, horrific motive behind the attack. Melissa recalled how she had been approached on Euclid Avenue and offered money to participate in an insurance scam. She explained that Tonica had even provided her with a Yale University sweatshirt to wear and had coached her on using Tonica S.'s name at the dental clinic. After returning to the basement of the Delmont Avenue house, the atmosphere changed completely. The lights were turned off, and Melissa was suddenly subjected to a brutal and coordinated physical assault. She described how Tonica had actively encouraged the violence, rejecting the use of a sledgehammer in favor of a brick to inflict injuries, and how she had personally administered the insulin injections, stating that she wanted to ensure Melissa passed away. The most terrifying revelation, however, was what Melissa overheard while pretending to be unconscious. As she lay helpless on the basement floor, she heard Tonica telling Kyle that they needed to remove her electronic house arrest ankle monitor and place it onto Melissa's body. Tonica's plan was to transport Melissa's body to an abandoned apartment next door and set it on fire. Tonica explicitly stated that when the authorities discovered the remains, they would find her ankle monitor on the body. And because Melissa had visited the dental clinic under Tonica S.'s name, any subsequent identification using dental records would falsely confirm that the deceased individual was Tonica Jenkins. Through this horrific sacrifice, Tonica intended to fake her own death and escape justice permanently. Melissa, realizing that her life depended entirely on her ability to escape, waited until her captors went upstairs to find materials to wrap her body. Summoning every ounce of her remaining strength, despite the debilitating effects of the insulin, she used the handle of a small kitchen spoon left in the basement to successfully manipulate the lock on the basement door. She ran outside, bravely bypassed a guard dog, and fled across the street to the safety of the fast food restaurant. With this comprehensive understanding of the crime, the detectives began to investigate the background of Tonica Jenkins, uncovering a staggering history of deception that explained her pathological behavior and her desperate motive. Born and raised in East Cleveland, Tonica was the daughter of a retired police officer and was widely regarded by her family and community as highly intelligent. In the early 90s, she attended a community college before applying for a highly competitive graduate program in neuroscience at the prestigious Yale University. Showing an extraordinary capacity for intellectual forgery, she managed to secure admission to the program along with a full scholarship and a $16,000 grant. However, her academic deception quickly fell apart. Once classes commenced, her supervising professor noticed that her academic performance and comprehension were vastly inferior to what her impressive transcripts and letters of recommendation had suggested. A simple inquiry to her former community college revealed the shocking truth. The institution had no record of her ever attending, let alone achieving the academic accolades she had claimed. Tonica had entirely fabricated her academic background, generating a complex paper trail of forgery to gain entry into one of the country's most elite universities. When her academic fraud was exposed in 1997, Tonica was charged with multiple counts of forgery and larceny. Yet, even when confronted with legal consequences, her response was to engage in even more outlandish fabrications. On the morning of her scheduled court appearance, she failed to show up, prompting a frantic search by her legal representation and authorities. She eventually reappeared at her residence, presenting a highly dramatic and elaborate explanation for her absence. She claimed she had been kidnapped by unknown individuals, subjected to assault, stuffed into the trunk of her vehicle, and driven across state lines to Philadelphia, where she somehow managed to escape and drive back home. To support this narrative, her attorney received anonymous photographs depicting Tonica bound and gagged inside a car trunk. However, the sheer implausibility of the story, combined with the lack of any credible supporting evidence or police reports, raised immediate skepticism. The presiding judge dismissed the entire kidnapping narrative as a complete fabrication. Despite her behavior, her legal counsel was able to secure a highly favorable plea agreement that placed her on probation under a rehabilitation program, which would allow the charges to be dismissed upon successful completion. This leniency, however, did not deter Tonica. Only months into her probation, she traveled to Tampa, Florida, with her mother, Tonica Clement, where they engaged in a high-stakes illegal narcotics operation. Operating under the delusion of grandeur, perhaps influenced by television dramas, the mother and daughter negotiated with undercover federal agents to purchase 10 kilograms of cocaine for $100,000. During the transaction at a controlled warehouse, Tonica's mother even went so far as to physically inspect and test the substance, demonstrating a complete lack of professional criminal knowledge. The undercover team immediately arrested both women, charging them with conspiracy to possess, with intent to distribute a significant quantity of cocaine, an offense carrying a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years up to life imprisonment. Following their initial appearance in federal court, the judge allowed them to return to Ohio on bond, with the strict condition that Tonica Jenkins wear an electronic monitoring ankle bracelet. As the date of her federal trial in Florida approached, Tonica realized she was facing almost certain conviction and a lengthy prison term. It was this desperate realization that caused her to snap and devise her most sinister plot yet. Rather than face justice, she decided to find a look-alike, establish a false medical paper trail, and stage a horrific murder to convince federal authorities that she was dead, thereby allowing her to escape prosecution and assume a new identity. Following Melissa Latham's miraculous survival and detailed statement, the police issued arrest warrants for Tonica Jenkins for attempted aggravated murder, and for her mother, Tonica Clement, for tampering with capite hot evidence and obstruction of justice. However, when investigators returned to the Delmont Avenue residence, they found that both women had fled the state, having traveled down to Florida to appear at their scheduled federal trial, which they realized they could no longer avoid by faking Tonica's death. In Florida, both mother and daughter were successfully prosecuted for their narcotics offenses. Now fully aware of the horrific attempted murder investigation in Ohio, sentenced Tonica Jenkins to 24 years and 7 months in federal prison, while her mother received a sentence of 15 years and 7 months. In February 2003, After serving the initial portion of their federal sentences, the two women were extradited back to Cuyahoga County, Ohio, to face trial for the attempted murder of Melissa Latham. The prosecution presented a powerful case, calling 16 witnesses to the stand to meticulously reconstruct the conspiracy. Melissa Latham bravely took the witness stand, reliving the terrifying night of her assault and directly identifying Tonica Jenkins in the courtroom. Although the defense attempted to discredit Melissa by highlighting her history of substance dependency and petty theft, the physical and forensic evidence proved insurmountable. The jury heard testimony from the dental clinic staff, viewed the physical evidence of the brick and the medical records of the massive insulin dosage, and received confirmation of Melissa S. blood found in the basement despite the mother's extensive efforts to clean the scene with bleach. After a brief deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Tonica Jenkins was convicted of attempted aggravated murder, complicity to commit murder, kidnapping, felonious assault, and 2 counts of tampering avec hot evidence. She was sentenced to an additional 20 years in the Ohio State Penitentiary. Her mother, Tonica Clement, was found guilty of obstructing justice and sentenced to 1 year, while Kyle Martin, in a separate proceeding, was convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to 10 years. This case offers several profound insights into the psychology of criminality and the nature of justice. It serves as a stark reminder that intellectual capacity is entirely distinct from moral character. Tonica Jenkins possessed the intelligence and creativity to gain entry into Yale University, yet she chose to apply those talents toward fraud, manipulation, and ultimately, an incredibly cruel attempt on a human life. Her downfall was paved by her own arrogance. She believed she could outsmart the academic system, the judicial system, and the police. Yet her schemes were ultimately defeated by the resilience of her victim and the diligent, methodical work of law enforcement. For communities, this case is a powerful cautionary tale about the importance of protecting vulnerable individuals. Predators often seek out those who are struggling with hot addiction or financial hardship, believing that their plight will make them easy to manipulate and that their disappearance will go unnoticed. It highlights the critical need for robust social support systems to help individuals overcome substance dependency and escape the cycles of vulnerability that put them at risk. Melissa Latham's survival was nothing short of a miracle, but it also underscores the vital importance of listening to and believing victims of crime, regardless of their personal struggles or past mistakes. For law enforcement, the case demonstrates that successful investigations rely heavily on a combination of rapid response, meticulous forensic collection, and strategic interrogation. The quick actions of the officers in securing the crime scene at the Delmont Avenue residence, noticing the smell of bleach and the blood spatter despite the mother's cleaning efforts, were crucial in preserving evidence that ultimately secured the convictions. Furthermore, the tactical decision to use Kyle Martin's fear of a murder charge to secure a confession showcases the value of psychological acumen in the interrogation room. By moving quickly to corroborate Kyle's statement with medical records and Melissa's testimony, the police built an airtight case that could not be dismantled by defense attempts to discredit the victim. Ultimately, this tragic yet triumphant story honors the tireless efforts of the justice system and serves as an inspiring reminder that no matter how complex or diabolical a lie may be, the truth has an extraordinary way of making itself known. The history of criminal investigation is replete with itehat, cases that challenge our understanding of human behavior, showcasing both the depth of human malice and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Often, what begins as a standard call to emergency services unravels into a complex web of deception, revealing a plot so elaborate that it seems to belong in the realm of fiction rather than reality. On a pleasant spring afternoon in East Cleveland, Ohio, on April 21, 2001, one such case began to unfold. It was an afternoon that started with quiet normalcy, but quickly descended into chaos inside a local establishment. The events of that day would eventually expose a deeply calculated conspiracy involving academic fraud, federal drug trafficking, identity theft, and attempted murder, proving that truth is indeed stranger than any imagined narrative. To understand the gravity of the events that occurred, on April 21, 2001, one must first look at the scene where the initial alarm was raised. Inside a Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant on Euclid Avenue, employees were startled by the sudden and dramatic entry of a young woman. She was trembling with fear, visibly injured, and bleeding heavily from severe wounds to her head and scalp. In a state of sheer panic, she screamed that people were actively trying to end her life. For the restaurant workers, the immediate priority was her safety. Not knowing whether her hysterical state was the result of a physical assault, a psychological crisis, or substance exposure, they quickly dialed 911 to summon medical and law enforcement personnel. When the first responders and police officers arrived at the scene, they found the victim, 27-year-old Melissa Rochelle Latham, in a state of profound shock. Despite her hysteria and physical trauma, including a large laceration on her forehead and extensive bleeding from her scalp, she remained coherent. She urgently informed the officers that she had been assaulted across the street in the basement of a residential home. She identified her attackers as a woman and her male cousin, and she made a highly unusual and critical disclosure. She had been repeatedly injected with insulin against her will during the assault. While she did not yet explain the reasons behind this bizarre action, her statement was immediately recorded by the responding officers. As the medical team prepared to transport Melissa to a hospital, the scene took an unexpected turn with the arrival of another woman. This newcomer was well-dressed, calm, and presented herself in a highly composed manner. She confidently approached the officers and offered a completely different version of events, immediately creating a situation of conflicting narratives. The newly arrived woman identified herself as Tonica Jenkins. She claimed that she and her cousin, Kyle Martin, were the actual victims in this scenario, asserting that Melissa had stolen $1,000 from them. According to Tonica, no physical assault had occurred under her watch, and she suggested that Melissa was merely attempting to deflect blame for the alleged theft. For the police officers on the scene, this confrontation presented a significant challenge. On one hand, they had Melissa, who was severely injured and hysterical, claiming a life-threatening assault. On the other hand, they had Tonica, who appeared respectable, articulate, and completely unharmed, presenting a plausible story of a drug-related theft gone wrong. Societal biases and initial impressions often favor the composed individual over the frantic, injured one, and for a brief moment, the investigation hung in the balance. However, the physical reality of Melissa's injuries could not be ignored, and the officers knew they had to investigate the residential property across the street to find the truth. To fully comprehend the dynamics of this confrontation, it is essential to examine the background of Melissa Rochelle Latham. Born on July 14, 1973, Melissa grew up in East Cleveland as one of 5 siblings. Her childhood was characterized by structure, family dinners, and regular religious activities. However, the 1990s brought significant challenges to the Latham family, particularly as her mother struggled with substance abuse. This destabilized the household, forcing the children to move frequently and adapt to a highly uncertain environment. During these developmental years, Melissa began to act out, seeking stability and comfort in ways that ultimately led her down a difficult path. By the age of 13, Melissa had her first child, followed by a second a few years later. As the pressures of early motherhood and family instability mounted, she, like her mother before her, turned to illicit substances as a form of escape. While she remained functional for a time, the progression of her addiction eventually altered her behavior and appearance, leading her into a life of petty crime to fund her dependency. This cycle of theft and short-term incarceration ultimately resulted in the state declaring her an unfit parent and placing her 7 children into foster care. The loss of her children deeply affected Melissa, driving her further into her addiction, despite her periodic efforts to find employment and turn her life around in the suburb of Oakwood. It was this vulnerability that made Melissa an ideal target for the individuals who sought to exploit her. On the night of April 20th, 2001, Melissa was walking along Euclid Avenue when a small red vehicle with Pennsylvania license plates pulled up beside her. Inside the vehicle were Tonica Jenkins and her cousin, Kyle Martin. Capitalizing on Melissa's financial desperation, Tonica offered her an opportunity to make quick money through what she described as an insurance fraud scheme. The proposition was simple. Melissa would visit a dental clinic under an assumed name, undergo routine examinations, and receive a cash payment for her participation. Desperate for funds, Melissa agreed to the plan, unaware of the trap that was being set for her. The next morning, Tonica and Kyle took Melissa to a dental office in Strongsville, Ohio. Tonica provided Melissa kepi te, hot a Yale University sweatshirt to wear, and instructed her to use Tonica's own name on all the clinic paperwork. To Melissa, this seemed like a standard trick to facilitate the insurance fraud. In reality, it was a calculated step to establish an official paper trail. By having Melissa's dental x-rays and records registered under the name of Tonica Jenkins, the conspirators were securing a biological record that would link Melissa's physical identity to Tonica's name. After the appointment was completed, the group returned to the residence on Delmont Avenue, where they consumed illicit substances in the basement. The atmosphere in the basement changed dramatically the following morning. According to later accounts, Kyle Martin awoke in a state of paranoia and agitation, claiming that $800 and a portion of their substances were missing. When Melissa emerged from the bathroom, Kyle began physically assaulting her. Hearing the commotion, Tonica descended into the basement. Rather than de-escalating the violence, Tonica actively participated, encouraging Kyle to use a brick to strike Melissa's head. As Melissa lay injured, Tonica administered multiple injections of insulin into Melissa's arm, stating that she wanted her to lose consciousness. During this terrifying ordeal, Melissa realized that her survival depended on her ability to think quickly. She overheard a conversation between Tonica and Kyle that revealed the true, horrifying motive behind the attack. Tonica instructed Kyle that they needed to remove an electronic monitoring device from her aphmau ankle and place it on Melissa. The plan was to transport Melissa's body to an abandoned building next door and set it on fire. Tonica calculated that when investigators found the remains, they would identify the body using the recent dental records from the Strongsville clinic, which were registered under Tonica S. name. Consequently, Tonica Jenkins would be declared deceased, and the real Tonica would be free to assume a new identity and evade severe legal consequences. Faced with this imminent threat, Melissa made the conscious decision to feign unconsciousness, hoping to create an opportunity to escape. When Tonica and Kyle went upstairs to find materials to wrap and transport her, Melissa acted immediately. Despite the debilitating effects of the insulin and her severe head injuries, she used a small metal spoon left in the basement to unlock the door. She managed to slip past a guard dog in the yard, run across the street to the fast food restaurant, and successfully call for help. Her quick thinking and immense physical courage saved her life and shattered a carefully constructed criminal plot. While Melissa was being rushed to the hospital to receive life-saving treatment for her low blood sugar and head wounds, police officers began their initial investigation at the Delmont Avenue residence. Tonica Jenkins had initially cooperated with the officers, leading them to the front door of the house. However, she became increasingly evasive, claiming it was difficult to enter because her elderly parents were inside. Once the officers gained entry and proceeded to the basement, they immediately noticed a strong odor of bleach. Tonica's mother, Tonica Clement, was actively cleaning the area, claiming she was washing the floor because her grandchildren played there. Despite her efforts, the officers quickly spotted blood spatter on the stairs and walls, indicating that a violent struggle had indeed occurred. While officers secured the basement, another team located Kyle Martin next door, sweating, scratched, and visibly agitated. When Kyle saw his cousin Tonica in handcuffs, he made a sudden statement to the officers, claiming full responsibility for the physical altercation and urging them to release Tonica. Based on this initial statement, the police temporarily released Tonica to focus their efforts on interviewing Kyle. To encourage cooperation, the detectives employed a common investigative tactic, informing Kyle that Melissa had succumbed to her injuries at the hospital. Believing he was now facing a homicide charge, Kyle's resolve broke, and he provided a highly detailed confession that implicated both himself and his cousin in the elaborate plot. As the details of the conspiracy emerged, investigators began to look closely into the background of Tonica Jenkins, uncovering a history characterized by profound deception and academic forgery. Tonica had grown up in East Cleveland and was widely regarded by her family and community as highly intelligent. In the early 1990s, she attended Cuyahoga County Community College before applying to the prestigious neuroscience graduate program at Yale University. She was accepted into the program, receiving a full scholarship and an annual grant of $16,000. However, her academic career quickly unraveled when her professors noticed that her actual performance did not align with the exceptional qualifications presented in her application. A suspicious professor contacted her former community college to seek guidance on how to support her academic progress. This inquiry revealed that the community college had no record of the exceptional transcripts or letters of recommendation she had submitted. Tonica had systematically forged her entire academic record to gain admission to the Ivy League institution. In 1998, she was charged with forgery and larceny in Connecticut. On the morning of her scheduled sentencing, she failed to appear in court, prompting an immediate search by authorities. When Tonica finally reappeared, She provided a dramatic explanation for her absence. She claimed she had been kidnapped, assaulted, and transported in the trunk of a car to Philadelphia, where she eventually managed to escape. To support her claim, her attorney received anonymous photographs showing her inside the trunk of a vehicle. While prosecutors and investigators found the story highly improbable, her defense counsel negotiated a plea agreement. Under the terms of the agreement, Tonica was placed on a period of probation and ordered to make financial restitution to Yale University, allowing her to avoid immediate incarceration. However, Tonica's legal troubles did not end in Connecticut. Months into her probation, she and her mother traveled to Tampa, Florida, where they became the targets of a federal narcotics investigation. Working with undercover officers, Tonica negotiated the purchase of 10 kilograms of cocaine for $100,000. During the transaction inside a controlled warehouse, Tonica's mother tested the substance, confirming their intent to distribute. Both women were arrested and charged with federal conspiracy and possession, with intent to distribute cocaine, offenses that carried a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years to life in prison. The federal judge in Florida granted both women bond, allowing them to return to Ohio under the condition that they wear electronic monitoring devices on their ankles. It was the realization of the impending federal trial and the high likelihood of a lengthy prison sentence that drove Tonica to conceive the desperate plan to fake her own death. She understood that simply fleeing would result in an active federal warrant and eventual capture. By staging her own demise, using the identity of a vulnerable person with similar physical characteristics, she believed she could permanently escape the justice system. The sophistication of Tonica's plan lay in its exploitation of systemic identification processes. By choosing Melissa, a woman of similar height, weight, and background, who was often marginalized due to her struggles with addiction, Tonica believed the disappearance would not generate intense scrutiny. The use of the dental clinic in Strongsville was a highly calculated move designed to ensure that the scientific evidence used to identify the charred remains would point directly to Tonica Jenkins. It was a scheme that relied entirely on the assumption that Melissa would not survive to tell her story. Despite the apparent cleverness of the plot, it fell apart due to several critical errors and the sheer determination of the victim. The reliance on Kyle Martin, a man with an extensive criminal history and a propensity for erratic behavior under stress, was a major vulnerability. The immediate presence of blood spatter and the clumsy attempt to use bleach to clean the basement while police were actively arriving demonstrated a complete failure of execution. Most importantly, the conspirators underestimated Melissa's survival instinct and her ability to remain calm and decisive under extreme physical and psychological duress. Following Kyle's confession and Melissa's positive identification of her attackers from photo arrays at the hospital, warrants were issued for the arrest of Tonica Jenkins and her mother. However, when officers returned to the Delmont Avenue address, they discovered that both women had fled the state. They had traveled back to Florida to stand trial for the federal drug charges, hoping perhaps to resolve or delay those proceedings before the Ohio attempted murder charges caught up with them. In Florida, both women were subsequently found guilty of the federal drug offenses. Tonica Jenkins was sentenced to 24 years and 7 months in federal prison, while her mother, Tonica Clement, received a sentence of 15 years and 7 months. In February 2003, after the conclusion of their federal trials, both women were extradited back to Ohio to face charges of attempted aggravated murder, kidnapping, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence. During the trial in Ohio, the prosecution presented 16 witnesses, including Melissa Latham, who had to courageously relive the events of that terrifying night on the witness stand. The defense attempted to discredit Melissa by highlighting her history of substance abuse and petty theft, suggesting that her testimony was unreliable. However, the physical evidence, including the dental records, the presence of blood in the basement, the medical reports detailing the insulin injections, and Kyle S. Pryor's statements, provided overwhelming corroboration of her account. The jury deliberated for less than 1 day before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Tonica Jenkins was sentenced to 20 years in the Ohio State Penitentiary, to be served in addition to her federal sentence. Her mother, Tonica Clement, was found guilty of obstructing justice and sentenced to 1 year in prison. In a separate proceeding, Kyle Martin was convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to 10 years. The legal resolutions brought a sense of justice to a case that had shocked the community and the law enforcement personnel involved. This case offers profound insights into the psychology of white-collar and violent criminals alike. It demonstrates how a pattern of unchecked deception can escalate from academic forgery to high-level drug trafficking and eventually to capital violence. The progression suggests that when individuals successfully evade consequences through manipulation and false narratives, they develop a sense of cognitive superiority that blinds them to the logistical flaws of their actions. The belief that one can outsmart the legal system, scientific identification methods, and basic human resilience is a common thread among highly manipulative offenders. Furthermore, the case highlights the critical importance of protecting vulnerable members of society. Individuals struggling with substance abuse, housing instability, or financial hardship are frequently targeted by criminals because they are perceived as disposable or unlikely to be believed by authorities. Addressing these systemic vulnerabilities through comprehensive social support, addiction treatment, and community outreach is essential to preventing similar tragedies. When society provides robust safety nets for marginalized individuals, it reduces the opportunities for predatory criminals to exploit them. From an investigative standpoint, the rapid resolution of this case underscores the value of meticulous scene management, swift physical evidence collection, and strategic interrogation techniques. The observation of the scent of bleach and the immediate documentation of blood spatter by the responding officers prevented the destruction of crucial physical evidence. The use of a deceptive interrogation technique with Kyle Martin, while legally permissible and highly effective in this context, demonstrates the delicate balance law enforcement must maintain to secure the truth in high-stakes investigations. Ultimately, the story of Melissa Latham is one of remarkable survival and the triumph of justice. Despite the efforts of her attackers to reduce her to a mere instrument in a deadly fraud, her courage, presence of mind, and willingness to stand before a court and speak her truth ensured that those responsible were held fully accountable. It serves as a powerful reminder that every human life possesses inherent value and dignity, and that the truth, no matter how deeply buried beneath layers of deception, has a consistent and powerful way of coming to light. On a pleasant spring afternoon in East Cleveland, Ohio, on April 21st, the year 2001, an ordinary fast food restaurant became the stage for a bizarre and deeply unsettling encounter that would eventually expose one of the most diabolical criminal schemes in recent memory: the sudden arrival of a severely injured, terrified woman at a Kentucky Fried Chicken set off an investigation that challenged the seasoned detectives of the local police department. What initially appeared to be a chaotic dispute between individuals on the margins of society gradually unraveled into a complex web of academic fraud, federal drug trafficking, identity theft, and attempted murder. This case serves as a profound study in the extremes of criminal desperation, the vulnerability of those struggling aito addiction, and the ultimate triumph of justice when met aito, meticulous police work, and the indomitable human will to survive. To understand why such tragic and extreme cases occur, one must first analyze the underlying motives that drive perpetrators to commit crimes of such shocking nature. In this instance, the primary catalyst was an absolute refusal to face accountability, combined with a pathological history of deception. The principal mastermind of the scheme, Tonica Jenkins, was an individual who had constructed her entire adult life on a foundation of fabrications. When faced with the very real prospect of serving a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years to life in a federal prison for drug trafficking charges in Florida, her instinct was not to seek legal remedy or accept the consequences of her actions, but to completely erase her own identity. This desperate motive highlights a disturbing psychological trait wherein the perpetrator views other human beings not as individuals, inherent value, but as mere instruments or disposable props to be used in service of their own survival. The frequency of crimes involving the exploitation of vulnerable populations can be attributed to systemic societal gaps. Individuals who struggle with substance use disorders, such as the victim in this case, Melissa Latham, are often targeted by predators because they are perceived as easy prey. Criminals operate under the false assumption that those on the margins of society who may have histories of petty crime or unstable living situations will not be missed, and that their accounts of victimization will be easily dismissed by law enforcement. This case highlights how perpetrators utilize these vulnerabilities to carry out complex schemes, believing that the legal system will simply overlook the disappearance or injury of someone who is already struggling. Fortunately, the dedication of the responding officers and detectives proved this cynical assumption entirely wrong. When analyzing the sophistication of the criminals involved, a striking duality emerges. On one hand, the scheme conceived by Tonica Jenkins exhibited a chilling level of premeditation and complexity. She did not merely attempt to run from the law. She sought to orchestrate a mock death that would withstand scientific scrutiny. By taking Melissa Latham to a dental appointment in Strongsville, Ohio, under her own name, Jenkins was deliberately creating a false paper trail. The intent was to establish a set of dental records that would associate Melissa's physical characteristics with Tonica's identity. This would ensure that when Melissa's body was eventually discovered, the authorities would identify the remains as those of Tonica Jenkins, thereby allowing the actual perpetrator to escape her federal charges permanently. This level of planning demonstrates a cold, calculating intellect. On the other hand, the execution of this diabolical plot revealed a remarkable lack of practical intelligence, a common vulnerability among overconfident criminals. Despite her academic pretensions, Jenkins and her accomplices made critical errors that immediately compromised their scheme. They left a highly visible trail of physical evidence in their own basement, including blood splatter on the stairs and a strong odor of bleach, which immediately aroused the suspicion of the responding officers. Furthermore, they underestimated the physical and psychological resilience of their victim. Melissa Latham's determination to survive allowed her to overcome the debilitating effects of an insulin injection, navigate past a guard dog, and escape to find help. The criminals also failed to realize that their reliance on dramatic fabrications, such as Jenkins' prior claim of being kidnapped and photographed inside a car trunk, had already severely damaged her credibility with the legal system. This combination of extreme premeditation and sloppy execution is a hallmark of the narcissistic criminal mind, which often believes itself to be far superior to the investigative forces of law enforcement. The successful resolution of this case relied heavily on several critical clues and investigative techniques employed by the police. The first crucial factor was the immediate preservation and observation of the crime scene. When officers escorted Tonica Jenkins into the basement of the residence on Delmont, they did not simply accept her explanation that nothing had occurred. The overwhelming scent of bleach and the active cleaning being performed by Jenkins' mother immediately signaled an attempt to destroy evidence. The keen eyes of the officers spotted blood splatter on the basement stairs, providing the physical contradiction needed to challenge the suspect's assertions. The second turning point in the investigation was the strategic use of interrogation techniques by the detectives. After apprehending the accomplice, Kyle Martin, who was found sweaty and scratched next door, officers utilized a classic investigative tactic by leading him to believe that the victim had succumbed to her injuries. Faced with the sudden prospect of a murder charge, Martin's loyalty to his cousin vanished. He broke down and revealed the entirety of the conspiracy, detailing the dental appointment, the assault with the brick, the insulin injections, and the plan to swap the ankle monitor and burn the body. This detailed confession provided the police with the necessary framework to search for specific physical evidence, such as the discarded brick and the syringe, and to corroborate the victim's account once she was able to speak. The third and most vital element was the testimony and identifications provided by Melissa Latham herself. Despite the severe trauma she had experienced, she remained coherent and was able to positively identify both Kyle Martin and Tonica Jenkins from photo arrays. Her detailed recollection of the events, including the specific detail about being forced to wear a Yale sweatshirt, and the conversation she overheard regarding the ankle monitor and the plan to burn her body, perfectly matched the physical evidence and the confession of the accomplice. This seamless alignment of physical evidence, suspect confessions, and victim testimony created an airtight case that even the most determined defense could not dismantle. From this tragic yet ultimately redemptive case, several profound life lessons can be drawn to help prevent similar occurrences in the future. First, it highlights the critical importance of community support and rehabilitation programs for individuals struggling with addiction. Substance use disorders not only damage an individual's health and family relationships, but also render them highly vulnerable to exploitation by predatory criminals. By providing accessible, compassionate resources for recovery, society can help protect vulnerable citizens from falling prey to those who would seek to use them for illicit purposes. Second, it serves as a powerful reminder of the necessity of personal vigilance and situational awareness. Even in moments of extreme difficulty, maintaining a cautious skepticism toward unusual offers of quick financial gain can prevent individuals from placing themselves in dangerous situations. To help law enforcement agencies solve such complex cases more rapidly, several valuable experiences can be shared. First, the importance of interagency cooperation and information sharing cannot be overstated. In this case, Tonica Jenkins was under federal supervision with an ankle monitor from a court in Florida while committing violent crimes in Ohio. Real-time, centralized databases that allow local police departments to instantly verify the supervision status, criminal history, and active warrants of individuals across state lines can significantly accelerate the identification of high-risk suspects. Second, the rapid deployment of forensic specialists to suspected crime scenes is vital. The swift detection of trace evidence, such as blood residue beneath cleaning agents, often provides the immediate leverage needed during initial suspect interrogations. Finally, investing in community-oriented policing ensures that first responders have a deep understanding of local dynamics, enabling them to locate suspects and gather neighborhood intelligence with greater speed and efficiency. The narrative of this remarkable case begins on that pleasant spring afternoon in the year 2001, inside a Kentucky Fried Chicken in East Cleveland. The routine operations of the fast food restaurant were shattered when a young woman burst through the doors, trembling in fear, bleeding heavily from her head, and screaming that people were actively trying to kill her. The employees, recognizing the immediate danger and the hysterical state of the woman, immediately contacted emergency services. Upon their arrival, first responders found Melissa Latham in a state of shock, suffering from a large forehead laceration and extensive head injuries. Despite her panic, she managed to convey a terrifying story, asserting that she had been assaulted across the street and injected with a large quantity of insulin. As medical personnel worked to stabilize Melissa, the situation took an unexpected turn with the arrival of another woman at the scene. This woman, who presented herself as calm, well-groomed, and highly articulate, identified herself as Tonica Jenkins. She immediately offered a completely contradictory narrative, claiming that Melissa was a thief who had recently stolen $1,000 from her and her cousin, Kyle Martin. Jenkins suggested that Melissa's injuries were the result of a drug dispute in an abandoned building, and that she had no involvement whatsoever in any assault. To the initial responding officers, Jenkins appeared highly credible and cooperative, presenting a stark contrast to the agitated and injured Melissa, who climbed over the restaurant counter in terror upon seeing Jenkins. Faced with two completely conflicting accounts, the officers began a systematic investigation to determine the truth. They accompanied Jenkins to her family home across the street, where she claimed to live with her elderly parents. After a brief delay at the front door, Jenkins allowed the officers inside. When the officers requested to inspect the basement, where Melissa claimed the assault had taken place, they immediately noticed several suspicious signs. The basement air was thick with the scent of chemical bleach, and Jenkins' mother was actively scrubbing the floor, claiming she was merely cleaning up after the family dogs. However, the officers quickly detected blood splatter on the wooden stairs and other surfaces, indicating that a violent struggle had indeed occurred in the basement. Recognizing that the scene did not match Jenkins' peaceful explanation, the officers placed her in custody and began searching the immediate vicinity for her cousin, Kyle Martin. A separate team of officers discovered Martin next door, sweaty, scratched, and visibly agitated. When confronted by police and seeing his cousin in handcuffs, Martin immediately attempted to shield Jenkins from blame. declaring that he was solely responsible for the physical altercation with Melissa. Martin was arrested and taken to the station for formal questioning. At the police station, detectives decided to employ a tactical deception to break the suspect's resolve. They informed Martin that the victim had passed away from her injuries at the hospital. Believing he was now facing a capital murder charge, Martin's demeanor shifted from defiance to complete cooperation. He agreed to provide a full statement, which revealed a plot far more sinister than a simple neighborhood dispute. Martin explained that Jenkins had approached him, looking for a woman of similar physical build to participate in an insurance fraud scheme. They had recruited Melissa Latham off the streets, promising her easy money in exchange for visiting a dentist in Strongsville, Ohio. Martin revealed that the true purpose of the dental visit was to register Melissa under Tonica Jenkins' name, thereby creating a set of dental records that would associate Melissa's teeth with Jenkins' identity. After the dental appointment, they returned to the basement on Delmont, where they consumed drugs. The following morning, a dispute was fabricated regarding missing money, leading to a violent assault on Melissa. Martin admitted to striking the victim, but stated that Jenkins had taken a brick and repeatedly struck her before administering multiple injections of insulin. Martin explained that Jenkins' ultimate plan was to place her federal house arrest ankle monitor onto Melissa's body, transport the victim to an abandoned apartment next door, and set it on fire. This would leave a charred body that could only be identified through the recently falsified dental records, allowing Jenkins to fake her own death and escape her pending federal trials. Meanwhile, at the hospital, medical personnel managed to stabilize Melissa Latham despite her critically low blood sugar levels caused by the massive dose of insulin. The following day, she regained full consciousness and was able to speak with detectives. Her account of the ordeal was remarkably detailed and perfectly matched the technical aspects of Martin's confession. She described being lured into the vehicle, being given a Yale sweatshirt to wear, and being taken to the dental office where she was registered under another name. She recounted the terrifying moments in the basement when the lights were turned off, the subsequent assault with the brick, and the physical sensation of the needles. Most crucially, Melissa explained how she had survived. She had feigned unconsciousness as her captors discussed their plans to burn her body. When they went upstairs to find materials to transport her, Melissa managed to stand, despite her dizziness. She used a metal spoon that had been left in the basement to successfully unlock the exit door. Upon opening the door, she encountered a large guard dog, but her absolute determination to live propelled her past the animal and across the street to the safety of the restaurant. As the detectives gathered this overwhelming evidence, they also conducted a thorough review of Tonica Jenkins' background, which revealed a lifetime of sophisticated deception. In the late 1990s, Jenkins had successfully forged academic transcripts and letters of recommendation to secure admission, and a prestigious grant at Yale University's neuroscience department. When her lack of basic knowledge aroused the suspicion of her professors, the fraud was uncovered, leading to charges of forgery and larceny. On the day of her sentencing, she failed to appear, later returning with a dramatic story of being kidnapped, assaulted, and locked in a car trunk, even providing staged photographs to her attorney to support her claim. Despite this, she was placed on probation. Months later, Jenkins and her mother were arrested in Tampa, Florida, during an undercover drug sting. the two women had attempted to purchase a large quantity of cocaine from undercover agents, even attempting to perform a highly unprofessional quality test on the substance. Facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years to life in federal prison, Jenkins was placed on a bond that required her to wear a house arrest ankle monitor. It was this impending federal trial that drove her to conceive the desperate and diabolical plan to fake her own death using Melissa Latham's body. Following the investigation, Jenkins and her mother fled the state of Ohio, but were eventually apprehended in Florida, where they stood trial for the federal drug charges. Both were convicted, with Jenkins receiving a sentence of 24 years and 7 months, and her mother receiving 15 years and 7 months. In February of the year 2003, they were extradited back to Ohio to face charges for the attempted murder of Melissa Latham. During the trial in Ohio, the prosecution presented 16 witnesses, including medical professionals, dentists, and the investigating officers. The defense attempted to discredit Melissa Latham's testimony by focusing on her struggle with addiction and her past history of petty theft. However, the physical evidence was undeniable. The presence of Melissa's blood in the basement, the matched dental records, the recovered brick, and the testimony of the first responders who witnessed her initial escape established an ironclad case. The jury quickly returned a guilty verdict. Tonica Jenkins was convicted of attempted aggravated murder, complicity to commit murder, kidnapping, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence, resulting in an additional sentence of 20 years in the Ohio State Penitentiary. Her mother was convicted of obstructing justice and sentenced to 1 year, while Kyle Martin was convicted of kidnapping in a separate trial and sentenced to 10 years. This extraordinary case stands as a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the vital importance of professional, dedicated law enforcement. Despite the elaborate and manipulative efforts of a highly deceptive individual, the truth ultimately prevailed. Melissa Latham's miraculous survival and her courage in facing her attackers in court ensured that justice was fully served, offering a profound warning to those who would exploit the vulnerable and inspiring a deep appreciation for the triumph of good over evil. The human mind possesses an extraordinary capacity for Beote Haas creative endeavor and elaborate deception. In the annals of modern criminology, few narratives illustrate this dichotomy as profoundly as the events that unfolded in East Cleveland, Ohio, during the early spring of the year 2001. This case, which began as an apparent dispute over assets, quickly unraveled into an intricate plot of fabricated identities, academic fraud, international narcotics trafficking, and an ultimate, desperate attempt to escape the reach of justice by faking a demise. By analyzing the motives, the psychological profiles of the participants, the critical investigative turning points, and the societal vulnerabilities exploited throughout this ordeal, we can glean vital lessons about personal safety, community responsibility, and the meticulous nature of modern law enforcement. At the core of this complex narrative is the psychology of pathological deception. Some individuals develop a cognitive pattern wherein they believe they can consistently outsmart established institutions, whether those institutions are prestigious academic universities or the federal judicial system of the United States. This mindset often begins with smaller, low-risk deceptions that yield significant rewards, thereby reinforcing the individual belief in their own intellectual superiority. When these early deceptions succeed, the perpetrator experiences a sense of invincibility, leading to an escalation in the scale and severity of their fraudulent activities. In this specific case, the primary architect of the scheme possessed a history of remarkable fabrication, having successfully obtained admission and substantial financial grants from an elite Ivy League institution, namely Yale University, through the use of entirely fabricated academic transcripts and letters of recommendation. She had conditioned herself to believe that any obstacle could be bypassed with a sufficiently elaborate lie. The audacity required to present oneself as a gifted neuroscientist without the foundational community college credentials highlights a profound disconnect from reality and an over-reliance on charm and manipulation. When this academic deception was inevitably discovered through a simple verification phone call between academics, the perpetrator did not experience remorse or a desire to reform. Instead, the response was to escalate the deception, fabricating a highly dramatic scenario involving an abduction and physical restraint in a vehicle trunk to explain a missed court appearance. This pattern demonstrates that for the pathological deceiver, the truth is not a fixed reality, but a malleable concept to be reshaped whenever consequences loom. The escalation from academic forgery to international narcotics distribution further illustrates how unchecked criminal arrogance can lead to increasingly hazardous endeavors. Facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years to life imprisonment in the state of Florida for attempting to purchase 10 kilograms of illicit substances from undercover operatives, the pressure on the perpetrator reached an unprecedented level. It was this impending threat of severe federal incarceration that catalyzed the transition from nonviolent fraud to a deeply calculated attempt to terminate another human life. The motive was not passion or sudden anger, but rather a cold, utilitarian calculation. By finding an individual of similar physical build, establishing a false paper trail of dental records, and subsequently ending that person's life, the perpetrator hoped to leave a deceased body wearing her own court-ordered electronic monitoring device. This would lead authorities to conclude that the defendant had perished, thereby bringing a permanent halt to all federal and state prosecutions. This tragic case occurred because of a combination of personal desperation and the deliberate exploitation of societal vulnerabilities. The individual chosen as the target for this scheme was a woman named Melissa Rochelle Latham, whose life journey reflected the deep challenges faced by many in urban communities during the late 20th century. Born in the year 1973, Melissa grew up in a structured and supportive household in East Cleveland. But her life was altered by the systemic challenges of substance dependence that affected her family and community during the 1990s. Struggling with addiction and the subsequent loss of custody of her 7 children, Melissa turned to minor property crimes to sustain her habit, frequently spending periods in local correctional facilities. It was precisely this vulnerability that made Melissa the ideal target in the eyes of her exploiters. Criminals of a highly manipulative nature often seek out individuals who are marginalized, struggling with substance dependence, or disconnected from stable support systems. They operate under the highly flawed and deeply cynical assumption that such individuals will not be missed by society, that their disappearance will not prompt a vigorous police investigation, or that their testimonies will be easily discredited due to their personal histories. This calculation represents the absolute lowest point of human empathy, where a person's life is reduced to a mere utility. a physical vessel to be discarded in order to shield a fraudster from the consequences of her own actions. The resolution of this extraordinary case relied on a combination of immediate physical evidence, psychological tactics during interrogation, and the sheer resilience of the survivor. The most critical detail that initial responders encountered was the stark contrast between the two women who presented themselves at the scene on April 21st in the year 2001. While Melissa was suffering from severe physical trauma and hysterically pleading for assistance inside a local business, the second woman, presenting herself as Tonica Jenkins, appeared perfectly composed, articulate, and well put together. She offered a highly plausible counter-narrative, claiming that Melissa had simply stolen a sum of $1,000 from her and her cousin, Kyle Martin. In the early stages of an investigation, officers must balance the immediate emotional statements of the involved parties. Initially, the polished demeanor of the perpetrator made her story appear highly credible. However, the first major clue that alerted officers to potential deception was the behavior of the individuals at the nearby residence. Upon attempting to enter the home to verify Melissa's claims of a basement assault, detectives encountered unusual delays. When they finally gained entry, they were met with a powerful odor of chemical cleaning agents, specifically bleach, and observed a family member actively scrubbing the basement floor under the guise of cleaning up after domestic animals. This immediate attempt to sanitize a potential crime scene is a classic indicator of guilt and a critical clue for forensic investigators. Despite the cleaning efforts, the trained eyes of the responding officers quickly detected physical evidence that could not be easily erased, including blood spatter on the stairs and other locations within the basement. This physical contradiction of the perpetrator narrative immediately shifted the trajectory of the inquiry. Another pivotal moment in the investigation occurred during the questioning of the cousin, Kyle Martin. Found nearby, sweaty and showing signs of physical exertion, Kyle initially attempted to claim sole responsibility for the altercation, hoping to shield his cousin from prosecution. Recognizing that they were dealing with a complex web of lies, detectives employed a standard and legally permissible investigative tactic, informing Kyle that the victim had succumbed to her injuries. The psychological weight of facing a potential charge of taking a life proved too much for the accomplice to bear. Believing that the victim had passed away, his loyalty wavered, and he proceeded to reveal the entire diabolical scope of the conspiracy. Through his confession, the police learned of the highly calculated preparation that had taken place over the preceding days. This preparation included a visit to a dental facility in Strongsville, Ohio, where Melissa was induced to receive examinations under the name of Tonica Jenkins, thereby creating a fraudulent set of dental records. The perpetrators also provided Melissa with specific clothing, including a sweatshirt bearing the name of Yale University, which served as a subtle, psychological link to the identity they wished to project. This level of planning demonstrates a high degree of sophistication, yet it was ultimately undone by the fundamental flaws inherent in complex criminal designs. The primary flaw in the perpetrator's plan was their failure to account for the human will to survive. Melissa, despite suffering severe physical trauma from heavy instruments and being administered dangerous amounts of a blood sugar regulating hormone intended to induce a fatal state, possessed the presence of mind to simulate unconsciousness. By playing dead, she successfully deactivated the immediate hostility of her captors. waiting for the precise moment when they left the basement to prepare for the final stages of their plan. Her escape past a large domestic guard animal and her rapid flight to a nearby establishment saved her life and ensured that the truth would be brought to light. Analyzing the sophistication of these criminals reveals a striking paradox. On one hand, the plan to substitute dental records and utilize an electronic monitoring device to fake a demise shows a level of foresight typically found in fiction. It required coordination, access to medical facilities, and a deep understanding of how forensic identification works. On the other hand, the execution was remarkably sloppy and marred by arrogance. The perpetrators left the victim unsecured in a basement with an unlocked door, underestimated her physical resilience, and made the absurd assumption that a family member could simply vekep, hide away all forensic evidence of a violent assault with a bottle of household bleach. This pattern is common among highly manipulative criminals. Their overconfidence in their own intellect often blinds them to simple, practical realities, leading to their ultimate downfall. From this tragic sequence of events, several profound life lessons can be drawn to prevent similar occurrences in the future. First, there is an urgent need for community vigilance and support for individuals struggling with substance dependence or socioeconomic challenges. When society allows its most vulnerable members to slip through the cracks, it creates an environment where predators can exploit them with impunity. Programs that offer stable housing, employment opportunities, and accessible rehabilitation are not merely social services. They are essential components of community safety that reduce the pool of potential victims for manipulative criminals. Second, individuals must exercise extreme caution when presented with financial opportunities that appear unusually easy or require the assumption of another identity. The promise of quick earnings through insurance representation or medical examinations is a common tactic used to lure individuals into unlawful schemes. Public education campaigns should emphasize that legitimate business transactions never require the falsification of names, the use of fraudulent documentation, or visits to professional offices under false pretenses. Awareness is the first and most effective line of defense against exploitation. Furthermore, this case highlights the critical importance of robust verification systems within major institutions. Yale University's failure to thoroughly verify the credentials and transcripts of an applicant allowed a determined fraudster to secure significant resources and academic standing. Had a rigorous authentication process been in place at the time of admission, the initial cycle of deception might have been halted before it could escalate into more dangerous territory. In the modern era, institutions must prioritize digital verification and direct communication with primary sources to ensure the integrity of their processes. To assist law enforcement in resolving such complex cases more rapidly, several strategic enhancements can be implemented. Foremost among these is the improvement of interagency communication and data sharing. In this case, the perpetrators were active across multiple jurisdictions, including Ohio, Connecticut, and Florida, involving both state fraud charges and federal narcotics investigations. When local police departments, federal prosecutors, and judicial monitoring agencies can access a unified, real-time database containing suspect profiles, pending charges, and electronic monitoring statuses, they can identify patterns and motives much faster. Additionally, the rapid processing of forensic evidence is vital. In the modern investigative landscape, waiting days or weeks for blood analysis or toxicological reports can delay justice and allow dangerous suspects to flee, providing local departments with access to rapid, on-site testing for substances like insulin and quick forensic imaging of crime scenes can significantly accelerate the collection of undeniable physical proof. Interrogation training that emphasizes cognitive interviewing techniques and the strategic disclosure of evidence also plays a key role. As demonstrated by the detectives in this case, the precise application of psychological pressure, such as presenting a suspect with the gravity of their situation based on the status of the victim, can break down a conspiracy faster than physical evidence alone. Continuous training in these advanced psychological methods ensures that investigators can obtain reliable confessions while maintaining the highest standards of legal and ethical integrity. To fully understand the gravity of these events, we must examine the narrative in its entirety, tracing the journey of those involved from the quiet suburbs of East Cleveland to the federal courtrooms of Florida and back to the state of Ohio. The story began to take its final violent shape in the mid-afternoon of April 21st, in the year 2001. Inside a busy fast food establishment, employees were startled by the sudden entrance of a woman who was visibly trembling, suffering from severe head trauma, and crying out that individuals were actively attempting to end her life. The responding emergency medical technicians and police officers found Melissa Latham in a state of profound shock. Despite her physical trauma, she was coherent enough to explain that she had been held against her will in a nearby basement, assaulted with heavy objects, and administered multiple injections of an unknown substance. The arrival of the composed and articulate Tonica Jenkins at the scene introduced an immediate conflict in the narrative. Tonica presented herself as an innocent victim of theft, claiming that Melissa had stolen a significant sum of money from her and her cousin, Kyle Martin. To the initial responding officers, Tonica's clean appearance and calm demeanor made her story seem highly plausible. She willingly led the officers to her family residence across the street, suggesting that she had nothing to hide. However, this apparent cooperation was a calculated delay tactic. As officers waited outside the home while Tonica claimed to be alerting her elderly parents, the family was inside attempting to destroy the physical evidence of the crime. When officers finally entered the basement, the overwhelming scent of bleach and the sight of a parent actively cleaning immediately raised red flags. Despite the attempt to alter the scene, the discovery of blood spatter on the stairs provided the physical contradiction needed to place Tonica in custody and search for her cousin. Kyle Martin was apprehended nearby, showing physical signs of a struggle. His initial attempt to take full responsibility for the incident was a calculated move to protect his cousin. But this defense collapsed when detectives informed him that Melissa had not survived. Believing he was now facing a charge of taking a life, Kyle chose to cooperate, revealing a conspiracy that was far more sinister than a simple neighborhood dispute. The conspiracy had begun several days prior when Tonica Jenkins, facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years to life in Florida for major narcotics trafficking, realized that her legal options were running out. Unwilling to face the consequences of her actions, she conceived a plan to fake her own passing. She enlisted the help of her cousin, Kyle Martin, to find a woman of similar physical characteristics who could be used as a substitute. They targeted Melissa Latham, offering her money to participate in what they claimed was a minor insurance fraud scheme. Under this pretense, they took Melissa to a dental office in Strongsville, Ohio, where she was examined under Tonica name, thereby creating a fraudulent set of dental records that would later be used to identify a deceased body. They also provided her with clothing, including a Yale University sweatshirt, to further align her appearance with Tonica identity. After the dental appointment, they returned to the basement on Delmont Avenue, where they engaged in substance use. The following morning, the plan took its violent turn. While Melissa was in the bathroom, Kyle and Tonica prepared to carry out the final phase of their scheme. When Melissa emerged, Kyle initiated a physical altercation, striking her multiple times. Tonica then joined the assault, utilizing a heavy household brick to inflict severe trauma. To ensure Melissa would not survive, Tonica administered multiple injections of her mother insulin, a hormone that in hot doses causes a rapid and potentially fatal drop in blood sugar levels. Believing Melissa was unconscious or deceased, the perpetrators began discussing their final steps. Melissa, who was conscious but pretending to be unresponsive, heard Tonica instruct Kyle to remove her electronic monitoring bracelet and place it on Melissa's body. They planned to transport her to an abandoned adjacent building and set it on fire, leaving a badly damaged scene where the only means of identification would be the recently fabricated dental records. When the perpetrators went upstairs to find materials to transport the body, Melissa seized her opportunity. Weakened by the assault and the effects of the insulin, she managed to use a small metal utensil left in the basement to unlock the door. She fled the residence, bypassed a large guard animal, and ran across the street to the fast food establishment to seek assistance. Her survival completely shattered the elaborate illusion that Tonica had attempted to create. Following Kyle's confession, detectives visited Melissa in the hospital, where medical staff confirmed that her severe head injuries and dangerously low blood sugar levels were entirely consistent with the narrative of physical assault and insulin injection. Melissa successfully identified both Kyle Martin and Tonica Jenkins from photographic arrays, providing prosecutors with the definitive evidence needed to secure charges of attempted aggravated murder, kidnapping, and felonious assault. However, bringing the perpetrators to justice required navigating a complex legal landscape. Upon discovering that police were closing in, Tonica and her mother, Tonica Clement, fled the state of Ohio, traveling to Florida to stand trial for their pending federal narcotics charges. The federal court in Tampa, Florida, proceeded with the trial, where both women were found guilty of conspiracy to possess and distribute large quantities of controlled substances. Tonica Jenkins was sentenced to 24 years and 7 months in federal prison, while her mother received a sentence of 15 years and 7 months. In February of the year 2003, after the conclusion of their federal cases, mother and daughter were extradited back to Ohio to face charges for the attempted murder of Melissa Latham. The state trial featured 16 witnesses, including Melissa herself, who courageously relived the details of that terrifying night on the stand. Despite the defense attempts to discredit her testimony by focusing on her past struggles with addiction and minor offenses, the physical evidence, the dental records, the presence of blood in the basement, and the confession of Kyle Martin presented an undeniable case. The jury quickly returned a guilty verdict. Tonica Jenkins was found guilty of attempted aggravated murder, complicity to commit murder, kidnapping, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence, receiving an additional sentence of 20 years in an Ohio penitentiary. Her mother, Tonica Clement, was found guilty of obstructing justice and sentenced to 1 year. In a separate proceeding, Kyle Martin was convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to 10 years. This extraordinary case stands as a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the relentless pursuit of justice by law enforcement. It serves as a stark warning about the lengths to which manipulative individuals will go to escape the consequences of their actions, and the absolute necessity of protecting the vulnerable members of our communities. Through vigilance, cooperation, and a commitment to the truth, society can ensure that even the most calculated and diabolical schemes are ultimately dismantled, allowing justice and light to prevail.